Good morning. Hey everybody, it's Melissa here at Twin Oaks Family Farm. Thanks for joining us on our YouTube channel, Twin Oaks Farm Poultry, and we're taking a look at our Cornish rock cross meat chickens that are 15 days old. So there's now 124 of them. We've just passed the 2-week mark, and I wanted to get recording in order to show you this visual. This is a neat image when we get feed down and a majority of the flock goes to the feeder. So already about half of them have finished eating. I'm going to show you where they're sitting at. The lighting is really strong, so it's going to be kind of tough on the camera to make these adjustments, but over here, so there's maybe about half the flock there. So the situation there is our east facing doors are open, letting in morning sunlight. The birds have been in the closed barn overnight, and we've, just more or less opened the doors not too long ago. So they were under the heat lamps, and then when that sunlight comes in, a majority of the flock will typically go to where that sunlight is. It feels good. It has warmth behind it. There's not a lot of air movement, and I'm estimating, I would say our temperature is probably at least 55, 60 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature, and these birds want to be about 85 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature. But with the sunlight coming in and no breeze taking away the heat from the sunlight, then they're feeling warmth over there. So they're happy to leave the heat lamp. Sorry it looks dark when we go from that to that. But anyway, they're happy to leave the heat lamps at that point and go to where the sunlight is. And so a lot of them, though, are still eating. Now that we're just back over here, the camera can adjust a little bit. But also wanted you to see the visual image of them at the feeders to give a good perspective on these birds fitting at the feeder and how important it is to have room for them to get to the feeder. So, this feeder isn't full, but we've got 4 birds on the far side taking up a little more than half of that feeder, 3 birds on this side taking up about half of that feeder. So, we could say, let's say we could fit 7 birds on each side at 2 weeks old. 14 birds total is going to max out a feeder like that. So we've shown you before that when we get to a certain point with our flocks, and I'm going to try to move the camera and show you a different image, but I don't know how well we'll be able to see it. You really can't see it that well. I will try to zoom in, but I've shown you before when we get to a certain point with our flocks, there's some of the egg production birds over there that are about a month old. But we will switch to these big feeders like you see there. And we have some metal ones that are similar, but we'll switch to those. We're just about at the point of switching to those. Sometimes we're already into those, but this flock has done pretty well. Now I'll have to zoom back out, y'all. This flock has done pretty well staying in, I call these the baby feeder trays. So this flock has done pretty well staying in them. We've had to raise them. So we use scrap wood for risers under our feeders and waters, and we explain in various videos that one of our goals, one of our management practices with our meat birds is to have them standing up when they eat and when they drink. In order to accomplish that, you more or less have to keep the height of the trays at the height of your birds' backs to compel them to stand, because see, just like here, they'll sit down if they can, okay? And so they'll work hard at it to sit down and stretch their necks and reach, but that's not the muscle we want them developing. We want them developing the leg muscles. So like here, the 2 birds that are sitting down to eat, that's not what we want. The 2 birds that are standing up to eat, that's what we want. So we just raised these trays by the second riser, and you can see height-wise that we still need to raise them more. So that's typically when we get these up on 2 risers and they're able to sit down and still reach the food, that's typically when we're going to be switching to the bigger feeders. The bigger feeders, it is a little harder for them to reach down into the tray because it's a deeper well. But if they're able to sit at these and reach on 2 risers, then they'll be able to stand at the bigger feeders. So we might not do it immediately, but I would say by the end of this week, we will have our birds into, I call them the big bird feeders. So I don't know if y'all perceived a big movement of the flock away from that door. There's, you see Tanner, the Dotson, 2 of the dogs were out at the east facing door and moved the birds, but that's okay because they'll settle down where they want to be at. So you did hear me mention we're at 124 now. So the last time viewers would have seen this flock, they would have been about 13 days old. We just seen them about March 23rd, 2024 in the show and tell and share video, and they'd have been 13 days old. So things are a little different in here now than they were. We did add another feeder tray, so we're up to 10 of those, and we added the second wood scrap riser to make them too high, as in TWO, high, to get the birds standing up when they're eating and drinking. And we also changed the footprint of the pen. And so let me go back to the vantage point I started at, and looking at the layout of the feeders and waters is what I'm going to be referring to here. Okay, so you can see that's kind of an overall, I know it's a lot of visual things there. It's a busy image, not as far as birds moving, but as far as just lots of stuff and different lighting intensities because of sunlight coming in. But if you can see where the heat lamps are hanging, basically on the right hand side of the screen, 6 of them. Okay, so that's, if you can imagine just where those 6 heat lamps are and where the waters are. You can still see the waters there a little bit. And then the feeders down the middle, we had those pulled in way closer to that row of 6 lights. So basically, when it was 126 birds then. When they started in here, that was the footprint of their space. They weren't confined to that necessarily by physical barriers, but that's where the heat lamps were, that's where the food was, that's where the water was, that's where their resources were, and they were smaller. That's pretty much where they stayed. In just 2 weeks, so they're 15 days old, so by day 14, we had the setup in here adjusted, and it adjusted in increments and gradually, but as of the end of day 14, then we had these other 2 lights over here on the left side of the screen. We spread the feeders way out toward the left, and then we still have 3 of the original waters on the right, but we also put a couple waters over here, and we actually have a water back here too. So the point of that is, if you're starting birds, if you're starting meat chickens, they're going to grow quickly. And if they're way super confined when you start them, they're going to outgrow that quickly. If you do have ability to have space they can expand into, they're going to appreciate that. It's going to benefit them. And from a management perspective, it's going to make your job a lot easier if they can have more room, because these birds will become crowded quickly if they're really packed into a small space. I'm going to try to move the camera and just get the birds sunning so you can kind of see. So now easily a majority of the flock is where that natural sunlight is coming in. Okay. So, but it is, it is interesting that in 2 weeks, like they've grown in 2 weeks, they've grown to the extent that the room, the amount of space that accommodated them on day 1 is not big enough on day 14, day 15. And by day 15, we've doubled basically the footprint of the space that they have, okay? And we put these waters and feeders out to the outlying areas too, because as they use more and more of the space more frequently, it's better to have their resources within easy access of them, okay? Because literally, if a bird is sitting over here where I'm pointing the camera and decides it's hungry, if the food is all the way over there, like at the last feeder, the bird might just opt not to go get it. But if the food is right here, the bird will opt to go get it. And that's pretty particular to meat birds, but that's the truth of the situation. These are good visuals here. I want to show you these two heat lamps. This is how we want to see birds using heat lamps. We want them to more or less circle up around kind of the strongest part of that heat coming down from the bulb. We prefer their tails facing into the center of the circle and a gap in the middle of the circle. But anyway, you know, we trust the birds to know where they're comfortable too. So, so another interesting thing about the layout is overnight it got chilly. I mean, chilly enough like our vehicles, that the ones that had to sit outside were frosted this morning. Windshields were frosted. So it did get chilly. Barn was closed up. So basically we know in those situations, all the birds are going to be under the heat lamps. So like when we came in this morning, like this feeder here was not empty, not really even touched. This feeder, not really even touched. The feeders close to the heat lamps were empty. Waterers, I'm not going to have to fill this water or this water. Why? Because they're away from the heat lamps and the birds weren't here overnight. These three waterers, they're not empty, but they're down to just the trays. And, oh, sorry, let me try to get a different spot. Down to just the trays, and there's not water in the reservoirs. So I will be filling those. So sorry for the picture quality on this video. It's because of dealing with the different lighting there. But these birds have eaten, got a drink, and so they'll rest now for a little while. And that's a cycle, like rest, then get up, eat, drink, manure, get some exercise, rest again. Each flock kind of settles into that on their own. I don't have it down to a timed number to tell you, but we in general expect like every 2 to 4 hours the birds are basically repeating that same cycle over and over and over again. So and another little thing on the consumables that they're using, we started out in this area with let's see, y'all, this is probably about 15 by 20 that they're in. We did spread 5 bags of pine shavings, so those are 3 cubic foot compressed. But we spread 5 bags of pine shavings in here to start with. We've really only added a half a bag and just added it under the heat lamps. And other than that, we've just fluffed bedding gently and tried to make sure there was dry bedding where the heat lamps are. And so we've only used 5.5 bags of bedding so far. We bought 12 to use over the entire 30, what I say, this flock's going to be 37 days when it goes to processing. So, you know, we probably will use the rest of those, but we've tried to make sure it's dry and clean where they are, and try to make sure there's enough bedding to absorb the manure that they're putting down. But we also try to be mindful of how much we're using, because that's a resource that costs a little money. And then the other interesting consumable statistic on this flock is, so 15 days old, we just put in the last of 200 pounds of feed. So we expect them to eat 1,000 pounds of feed in about 5 weeks, a little over 5 weeks. We expect them to eat 1,000 pounds of feed. We have a door going to close, maybe the wind caught it, so it might bang. So we expect them to eat 1,000 pounds of feed. They've consumed 200. But if y'all remember, we went over feed consumption. I think it took them 10 days to eat the first 100 pounds. It's only taken 5 days to eat the second 100 pounds. And then, you know, we fully expect to get to the point where like we're giving them 50 pounds a day by the end of production. So they're going to grow. And so at 15 days old, we would say, we kind of, if you imagine a 6-week production from the time they're hatched to the time we process them, we kind of roughly divide that up into 2-week increments. We call the first 2 weeks starting them, the second 2 weeks growing them, and the last 2 weeks finishing them. So we would more or less say they've passed the start threshold and they're into the grow phase. And that's just kind of from a management perspective to delineate where we're at in the process. But that's part of it. Like, you know, you see the feed rate consumption increase, the water rate consumption increase, the need for like different size feeders happen, and the footprint of where the birds are at, the space that they need, you know, it doubled in the first 2 weeks. So, so when we get out to the end of production with this group, yes, we would imagine that when we're looking at these 120 some birds, they're not going to be just filling like that fourth of their space. Yeah, I'm sorry, y'all, on the lighting, I'm trying. They're not going to be just filling that fourth of the space. They're going to be filling this entire space. So anyway, so there's Gus and Tanner. They're having fun. We'll peek at the neighbors before we wrap it up. And hey, we appreciate y'all joining us. I don't know. I don't know if we can get a good look at them. It might be too much bright. But this is the egg production group. They are about a month old. They were almost a month old, because they were hatched like February 28th. And it's March 25th today. So, all right, y'all have a good week. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe, like, and comment.